All right, let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine getting one last letter from a mentor. But they're not writing from a peaceful retirement home. They're writing from death row. That's exactly what we're unpacking in this explainer. A deeply personal message, written in the shadow of execution, with the fate of an entire movement hanging in the balance.
I mean, the stakes really could not be higher. You've got this leader, the Apostle Paul, locked up in a Roman prison, waiting for his death sentence. And on the other side, his young protege, Timothy, is facing this huge crisis of fear and desertion. The only thing connecting them, this one final urgent letter.
So, to really get what's going on here, we have to travel back in time to ancient Rome, around 67 AD. Paul is in his second Roman imprisonment. Now, his first one was more like house arrest, but this one is the real deal. And ancient tradition tells us it ends with his execution. So this isn't some abstract theological discussion, it's a final testament.
What's so incredible is just how personal this letter is. Paul calls Timothy his dear son. He mentions specific people, real struggles. It's packed with such believable, personal details that even many critical scholars, the ones who doubt Paul wrote his other letters, they tend to admit this one feels authentic. It really does read like a final farewell from a father to his son in the faith.
But here's the thing, as personal as this letter is, it also fits into a much bigger story. It's not just some private note, it's actually a crucial piece of a larger theological puzzle. Let's take a look at how it all connects. There's this fantastic framework from a scholar, Dr. Robert Yarbrough, that helps make sense of the whole biblical narrative. He calls it PMEEC. The Old Testament is the preparation for the gospel. The Gospels? That's its manifestation in Jesus. The book of Acts shows its expansion into the world. And then you have the letters, the epistles, like 2 Timothy. They're the explanation. They answer the question, so what does all this good news actually look like in our lives? Okay, so if this letter is an explanation, what exactly is it explaining? Well, at its core, it's explaining how to endure when you're terrified. Timothy was probably facing some serious opposition, and people were literally abandoning the mission. So Paul's central message is basically a command to stand firm. You got to notice Paul's approach here. He doesn't just bark an order. He says, I remind you. It's kind of diplomatic, but totally firm. And that metaphor, fan into flame, it's so powerful, right? He's telling Timothy, hey, everything you need is already inside you, like a glowing ember. Your job isn't to create the fire, it's just to give it some air and stir it up. And here we see this super stark contrast. Paul directly calls out that spirit of timidity, of fear and shame, that's threatening to just snuff out Timothy's flame. And he counters it with what God has given them, a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline, or you could say a clear, sound mind. This isn't about just trying harder or mustering your own courage. It's about plugging into a completely different spiritual power source.
So that brings up a pretty big question, doesn't it? If this strength doesn't come from us, then where does it come from? How can anyone, let alone a young leader in the middle of a crisis, actually live this out?
Paul's answer is just cosmic in scale. He grounds their present struggle in an ancient reality. He says the courage they need comes from a grace that was given to them before the beginning of time. Just think about that for a second. He's saying their salvation isn't some new thing. It's rooted in God's eternal purpose. It's a plan that's older than any crisis they're facing right now, which kind of makes that crisis seem a whole lot smaller.
And right here, this is the engine that drives that hope. The reason they don't have to be afraid of suffering or even death is their belief that Christ has already defeated it. For Paul, sitting there on death row, this is everything. Death has lost its ultimate power. It's been destroyed, and life and immortality have been brought out into the open for everyone to see. And this is where all that abstract theology gets deeply personal. Why isn't Paul ashamed of his chains, of his impending execution? It's not because he knows what he believes. He says it's because he knows whom he has believed. It's a confidence based on a relationship, a deep, personal conviction in the one who can guard his life even through death itself.
Now, Paul makes these challenges really concrete. This wasn't just some theological debate club. This involved real people making real choices with very real consequences. Let's take a look at how this all played out. You can just feel the human drama unfolding right here. On one side, you've got this crushing disappointment. Paul actually names names. He says, everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me. I mean, can you imagine how incredibly painful that must have been? But then, on the other side, you've got this guy, Onesiphorus, whose loyalty just shines. He actively sought Paul out in prison, he refreshed him, and, this is crucial, he was not ashamed of my chains. Paul holds him up as this profound example of what true encouragement looks like.
So all of this brings us to Paul's final and maybe most urgent charge. With his own life coming to an end, his focus shifts completely to the next generation, to making sure this message survives. He is passing the baton.
Paul uses this incredible metaphor, the good deposit. He's framing the gospel not just as a bunch of ideas, but as a priceless treasure, a sacred trust that has been placed into Timothy's care for safekeeping. It just highlights its immense value and the massive responsibility to protect it.
And this is the final command of the chapter. Guard the good deposit. But here's the key. Timothy isn't supposed to do this alone. He's to guard it with the help of the Holy Spirit who lives within the community. It's a shared responsibility, and it's empowered by a divine helper. So, as we wrap up this look at an ancient letter, that final charge kind of echoes down through the centuries to us, doesn't it? Paul's message of legacy and responsibility forces us to ask a question that goes way beyond the historical context. Whether it's a belief, a skill, a value, a relationship, what priceless treasure, what good deposit has been entrusted to your care, and how are you guarding it?